Welcome to the Boston Learning Summit. Today, over the course of the day, we'll have over 90 organizations represented, some of whom have been working with the Boston Public Schools and Boston After School and Beyond for the last 5 years on this new integrated model of summer learning. And many of you are new. And just as a quick refresher, we've come a long way when some people in town had an idea that what if we took the best of schools and the best of the out-of-school time community and joined forces to create really enriching, engaging, and academically focused summer programs for kids. We're proud to say that not only has that happened, but we have great results to share. So today is all about learning. We're going to hear about the near-term findings of a study that was supported by that is supported by the Wallace Foundation and being conducted by RAND. If you look at summer learning in Boston today, you'll see that it's citywide. And we're extending the classroom to the community. And the diversity of providers is really meeting the diverse array of needs that kids present. And so by working together, we can do more than we can do alone. And it's worth noting that when you look across the city, kids are learning in new learning environments. They're on Thompson Island, at Hale Reservation. They're on college campuses. They're at workplaces. They're accessing Boston's cultural institutions. They're sailing. They're doing things they might not otherwise do. It isn't that the point of having everyone work together. So this slide shows just about everyone who's in the room. Our goal today is to need a new slide for this. We want to bring in more organizations into this learning community so that we're learning lessons from one another, knowing where we excel and where we can improve, not only as individual organizations, but as a city as a whole. And we're just getting started. There's new work ahead on summer learning. In addition to focusing on very specific student groups, off-track high school students, English language learners, early learners, middle school youth, we're also trying to add to the research base in several areas. So we're going to do a study on STEM this summer, looking at the intersection of STEM and engagement in learning. We'll continue the work on common measures so that we can see what's working and what's not. We'll continue to focus on how the skills such as critical thinking, collaboration, perseverance, which can be developed in great summer programs, will pay off in college readiness and college persistence and success. And finally, we're looking at a new credential called badging, which we'll explore this summer. We want to learn more from you about how we can be helpful to you. So you'll see in your packet a brochure on the Summer Insight Center. This is a forthcoming resource that captures all the data we have from working together, including the RAND data, which you'll hear today. We want to hear from you. What else would be helpful? How would it be helpful to see it? How would you engage with the material? So this is a very active discussion, and we invite your input, not only today, but over the next several weeks. And finally, I'd like to thank the funder communities for supporting this project. It began in 2010 with the Boston Opportunity Agenda. It was supported by the Wallace Foundation and several other funders. And they're really showing what a big difference philanthropy can make when it invests directly in kids and also in the research necessary to support it. So we wouldn't be here today without these funders. And finally, a personal thank you. There's one person who is both an architect of this approach and its lead supporter in his former role and now in his current role as Chief of Education for the City of Boston. So please join me in welcoming Ron Dorsey.
Good morning, everybody. Hello, family, old friends, new friends. This is great to see the summer learning community expand. I cannot tell you how good it feels to talk about summer this morning. After the beatdown we've gotten from Old Man Winter, it is surprisingly hopeful to talk about summer. It inspires an intense amount of joy to be talking about summer right now, given the beatdown that we've gotten. But Chris said the weather will follow the planning. You know, part of the reason that I have a lot of hope for the summer and that there's a lot of joy is not just because I'm feeling a post-traumatic stress reaction, but really because there's a lot of effort that we've put into building a summer learning system that is bearing fruit right now. A lot of effort has gone into building Boston Summer Learning community, and we've done it in a relatively short time with a lot of success. And so today we want to talk about some of that success and how we build on the success going forward. Before I get into those remarks, I should have started with the proper protocol and bring you greetings on behalf of the mayor, Martin J. Walsh, to start there. He would have loved to have been here today, but as you know, we've got 4 public candidates for the superintendency of Boston Public Schools, and he will be very involved over the course of the week in making sure that the public is able to see those candidates. He wants to see them in the light of day. It's going to be a very exciting time in the city this week and going forward. So let's jump back quickly to summer, because the success that we've seen has been validated from a number of angles and perspectives, not the least of which is the research that RAND has done for us in collaboration with the Wallace Foundation. The first report that you'll see really is one in a series of reports that you'll see in coming summers about the effect of year-over-year rigorous summer learning on student outcomes, summer learning loss, and school performance. I don't want to steal a lot of Jennifer Sloan Combs' thunder here by revealing the results, because she's going to take us through a lot of the findings in detail, but I do want to make sure that I call out a few things that were really important to me as I review the results, and that I think we should think about how we continue to build on as a community. First of all, Boston is one of 2 sites that really led the pack of research cities in terms of attendance. So this means that we have actually built a set of learning experiences that young people want. They want to be a part of what we're doing, and what we're doing works for families. Secondly, Boston, like many of our peer cities, was able to help students produce significant math gains in summer. At least by this measure, we are able to make sure that we're returning young people back to school in the fall prepared for the year ahead. Boston, unlike many of our peers, did see a lot of movement on social emotional measures, as was our intent. Now, while this did not rise to the level of statistical significance, we do, and Jennifer, correct me if I'm wrong, probably see the only discernible results in this area of the city's study. This is huge. This speaks to Boston's commitment to whole child development and well-rounded learning, and it's something that we should continue to play a leadership role on. What cannot be overlooked in this work is how we've done what we've done. Our methods are somewhat unique when compared to the other cities in the RAND study. First of all, we relied on school and community partnerships to design the learning experience at the site level and to integrate instruction and enrichment to the degrees possible. We've been as concerned about skill development and social emotional growth as we have been about academic attainment during the summer. We've developed a co-training model where we are getting teachers and community-based organizations in the room together and thinking about the ways that adults best learn and best work together to the benefit of young people. We're also operating in both school and community settings, really purposely thinking about how you bring the whole city to life for the purposes of learning. And lastly, we've made a commitment to one another to share data and look at the same data and be involved in a communal process of continuous improvement. The features that I just mentioned really uphold a vision that probably started about 2010 or so, when a lot of leaders from around the city, BPS, our community partners, the funding community in Boston After School and Beyond, got in the room together over a series of conversations and asked the question, what would a learning system look like? What would a system look like that starts to break down the barriers between school and out of school time? What would a system look like that looks more comprehensively at the strengths and weaknesses of young people and is responsive to those things? And what would a system look like that shares learning and data across settings? So the convergence of shared vision and shared urgency really did lead us to summer first, because it was a time of the year that nobody owned in particular, where collaboration could really grow and fester in some very positive ways. And so we began with 5 schools, 7 community partners, and working with 232 students. And I think some of you are in the room who began that journey for us. And if you are, raise your hands, because I'm going to clap for you. I'll see you back there, Jonathan. Put them up high. All right. So thank you for your intrepid leadership on that. If we flash forward to the summer of 2014, we've evolved from what was in 2010 a summer learning pilot to a summer learning community. And there's a lot of pride to be taken in that. The partnerships between Boston Public Schools, Boston After School and Beyond, community partners, and the opportunity agenda includes 30 organizations operating 58 total sites and serving about 3,500 students. That's a few more than that 232 back in 2010. And these efforts reached at least 50 Boston Public Schools. And so we've gotten scale, and scale is one measure, I think, of the success that we've achieved. As is the coherence of the work that we're doing. I want to take a few minutes, if you'll bear with me, to talk about some other measures of success and hallmarks of the summer community success, because Jennifer is going to let us know how great we are. And she's going to challenge us because the work is not done, and I'll talk about that as well. But I want to make sure that we understand some other milestones and accomplishments we've hit along the way. Chris referred to the ACT framework. Many of you are familiar with it: achieving, connecting, and thriving. And so the framework, as you know, describes a set of skills and outcomes that we believe, and much research has shown, contribute to whole child development and well-rounded learning. Now, many frameworks exist. ACT is one of them. ACT draws on some of these frameworks. And the measure of our success is not so much in having created the ACT framework or synthesized the ACT framework, but the success is really in the development and norming of a common language for ourselves that allows schools and OST providers to really best describe what they bring to the learning enterprise and to be able to negotiate, talk across those learning settings to figure out what the collaborative efforts of schools and out-of-school time providers will be to promote whole child learning. It really gives us a way to move beyond conversations that talk about school, out-of-school time, in fractured or fractious ways, but to really think more cohesively about this learning system that has been our goal for a long time. The ACT framework has also prompted some paradigm shifting and pushing our collective thinking beyond education and enrichment to learning. I often like to steal some language that the Rennie Center uses when they talk about going from schooling to learning, because this is really about what full engagement in development looks like, no matter what the time of day or no matter what the community space is. And so we moved to a place, I think, where we recognize that you can't separate the heart and the head in our education and development efforts, but it's both simultaneously at all times of day wherever learning takes place. And so what ACT has done for us is helped us to build mutual accountability across education settings, integrate academic and youth development toolboxes, connect the program dots, particularly through building cross-organizational capacity and shared tools. And we've also figured out how to develop some co-management strategies between public entities like the Boston Public School System and quasi-private and nonprofit entities like Boston After School and Beyond. The shared governance makes a difference. We play to our strengths when we collaborate in that way, and it contributes to the systems building that we're looking for. The ACT framework, and here's another hallmark of our success, I think, has spurred some important R&D work in data sharing and data development. In partnership with the National Institute for Out-of-School Time, we are more consistently assessing program quality, student satisfaction, and student outcomes on non-academic measures than we ever have. And we can see this now across several organizations. Add to that the work of the Pear Institute at Harvard, which is helping us to see young people's social emotional strengths and weaknesses. Then we start to get a picture of the whole child, and we can respond accordingly both to strengths and needs. The data have really helped us to define and align in some ways the work that we're doing. Part of the success that we've achieved can be gauged by the shared understanding the shared practice, and the shared identity that derives from this work. And because of our investment in shared data, we can declare that we've successfully built the basic architecture for a citywide learning system. A final way that we can gauge our success is by the influence that summer learning is having on the school year. And I want to underscore the importance of this because in 2010, when we had the conversation about a citywide learning system, summer was the obvious place to start, but our goal was really to think about how do we innovate and transform the school year and move to a system of year-round learning. And so BPS has undertaken a number of changes, and Melissa Partridge here is to thank both for her leadership inside the district and at the summer learning table to move a lot of that forward. First of all, the district realigned its formative assessment schedule for us, something that really did not have to happen. But after the first couple of years of this work, we said, based on the data that we have, and when the district looks at student formative results in February and then again in September, this isn't a good way for us to look at summer and kind of narrow summer. So they readjusted so that we're looking at an assessment in May and now an assessment in September. Jennifer will tell you, we have not cracked the code on figuring out how to best measure summer learning loss, but we've better positioned ourselves through this shift in the data collection to better isolate summer, and that has been important. BPS is also using a lot of the program quality and student satisfaction measures that we've innovated in summer. Many of the Title I partners that serve BPS schools now have to report these data so that we can see not only what they're doing in summer, because many of them are summer partners, but what does the effectiveness of their work look like on a day-to-day basis in their school year partnerships. My hope is that the lessons that we're taking from these efforts, coupled with your growing knowledge about what works and what you're innovating, will help us shape the district's extended learning time strategy. And so many of you know that in a recent agreement between BPS and the Boston Teachers Union, we are adding 40 minutes to the school day for 60 schools over the next 3 years. It will begin with about 15 schools this year. The good thing is that the people in this room know a whole lot about what expanded learning looks like, what blended and integrated learning looks like, and we need to bring that knowledge to bear on how schools will use the time that they've now been afforded. It's not just putting 5 more minutes on the back of a class period. It's not just putting the 40 minutes on the end of the day and doing the same thing. It's really thinking about how do we leverage what we've learned the whole day, expound on it, and let students experience it in some different ways. Nobody knows how to do this better, I think, than our summer learning community. So what this all really adds up to is concrete evidence of Boston's ability to open doors throughout our communities to learning, and to do so in a way that brings the best of school and community to bear on learning. To do so in a way that challenges young people and engages young people to bring their full selves to the learning enterprise. It's also proof that we as adults, often the guardians of tradition and habit and apologists for inertia, can actually do something different. It proves that we adults can actually think in different ways and ourselves learn in ways that are impactful to our work and have a lot of meaning on the learning experience for young people. And so I beg of you, keep bringing your expertise, keep bringing your talent to this enterprise, because we've got a way to go. And while we've achieved a lot of success, we can't be satisfied with where we are. A couple of things that we have to do, well, maybe more than a couple of things that we have to do. First of all, as the RAND study will illustrate, we've got to crack the code on improving literacy outcomes in the summer. Jennifer will talk to you about the degree to which we didn't really see the kinds of results that we want to see on literacy, and certainly not the kinds of results we saw on math. We can do it. I think there's some complex things to understand about how you move literacy metrics and how that improvement happens, especially in the short window of time that we have in summer, but we can do it, so let's take that on. We've got to identify ways to more precisely measure and gauge summer learning loss, as I talked about a little while ago. We've got to continue to focus on and better understand the relationships between academic knowledge, skill building, and social emotional development. This is what we do in summer. This is the challenge that we've taken on. And while to some degree the school year has struggled with this a bit more, the R&D and the innovation has been happening in Boston since 2010. So let's figure out how we're going to more directly lead in getting to the kind of approaches that both align with the framework, but I think regardless of whether it's connected to Common Core or not, the summer community has always known greatly benefit students and position them for learning. So I just want to take this moment to claim, and you should too, that Boston is in the vanguard on summer learning. The success speaks for itself. The next challenges, though, are quite evident, and I hope that you will take the advantage of the rest of this day to gain a deeper understanding of where we stand, what that success looks like, to process the lessons and build on our success in ways that further push the boundaries on learning in Boston. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ron, for your comments and continuing to push us forward as we work together. So she's an expert in the connection of school, after school, and summer learning. She probably knows more about these endeavors in Boston than anyone else in the country, having studied both the out-of-school time efforts here and summer learning. And she's a lead author on Ready for Fall, which you have a copy of in your packet and which is available on that table. Jennifer Sloan McCombs is going to join us to talk about the near-term findings of the randomized controlled trial for Boston and 4 other cities. Welcome, Jennifer.
So I'm here to give a little bit of background on our study, which is a randomized controlled trial in 5 districts across the nation that's funded by the Wallace Foundation. And I'm going to give an overview of the study, the programs themselves, what they share in common, and their differences. I'm going to discuss our near-term findings, and these are findings as of the fall of 2013, so after our first summer of the program. And then I'm going to talk about what are the implications of our findings for providers, and also a little bit for funders as well. So we all know that it's important to understand the effects of summer learning programs. There's evidence in the research base that summer learning loss occurs, particularly for students in poverty. And prior research has established that there are some programs that are effective in improving academic outcomes, but not all. So there's a lot known about mandatory summer programs and very small, niche, not scaled programs as well, and some also reading at home programs. But very little is known about the effects of large-scale voluntary summer programs, the extent to which Ron talked about the scale in Boston, and we also see it in these other districts. And we don't know a lot about cumulative years of progress. So if kids go for year after year after year into summer programs, what is the effects of this? And this is National Summer Learning Study is intended to answer these questions and these holes in the literature. So the study is rather unique. It's national in scope. So Boston, of course, is one of the cities involved in this effort, along with Dallas, Duval County, which is in Florida in the Jacksonville area, Pittsburgh, and Rochester. Now, this study started out actually in 2011 with 2 years of formative study. So I know a lot of friendly faces who have put up with us for 4 summers of study. And then we started the outcome study, this randomized controlled trial that I'll tell you a little bit about in summer of 2013. So in spring of 2013, all the districts recruited 3rd grade students for the opportunity to participate in 2 years of voluntary summer programs that are run by urban districts and community partners. This study examines academic achievement, social and emotional competencies, and then we'll also be looking at some school year outcomes, including behavior and attendance. And it's also unique because it has collected a very rich set of data on program implementation, which we're able to link to outcomes as well. Now, these district programs all share some core characteristics. First of all, they're voluntary. They're full-day programs, so they run sort of the entire day. They are offered 5 days a week for no less than 5 weeks during the summer. They offer at least 3 hours of instruction in language arts and mathematics each day, and then the rest of the day is devoted to enrichment activities. They all have small class sizes of no more than 15 students per class, and they are free of charge for families and include transportation and meals. So across all of the districts, these are the core components. But they also have really unique attributes, and those attributes can differ sort of across the districts and even within a district itself in terms of the type of enrichment offered. So for instance, in Boston, that varies by site because they each have a unique community partner. So kids who went to a tenacity program did tennis in the afternoon, and if they were at Hale Reservation, they were hiking around, canoeing and swimming. The districts each selected their own curriculum for ELA and mathematics, so that's not common across the districts, although they all had a common curriculum. And I should have mentioned that all the instruction was provided by certified teachers from the district. They also vary in terms of the organization of the day. Some of them offered sort of like the academics in the morning, enrichment in the afternoon, and others of them sort of mixed it up. So kids would rotate from go to a reading class, then go on a nature hike, come back for math, have lunch, and things were more fluid during the day. And then the timing during the summer also differed. So some started immediately after the summer started, others waited a couple weeks. And then I would say also that Boston is unique in its intentional focus on social and emotional development, and Ron mentioned that as well. And while all the other districts had this grand goal of improving social and emotional outcomes for kids, none of them did anything intentional to ensure that their programs would actually develop those capacities within students. So all in all, this study is really unique in that it examines a proof of concept about voluntary programming for low-income students. And that's part of its power, sort of its national in scope. It spans 5 districts. It's not studying the effectiveness of a very specific curriculum in a very specific place. It's really about this concept of offering voluntary summer learning programs to our students. Okay? So these are just an overview of the Boston Summer Learning Project National Study Site. So you know that there are a lot more grade levels involved in the SLP in general in Boston, but this study focused on sort of, at this point in 2013, students rising into 4th grade, 3 to 4 students. But from the time that we started working in Boston, you'll see a growth in the number of feeder schools, the number of nonprofits involved in this, the number of sites at which programs are offered, and the number of students. All right, so now just a little bit about the study methods that we use. So we have a randomized controlled trial here. And so one of the nice things about a randomized controlled trial is that it provides the most rigorous set of evidence available because we are able to randomize students who all went in to attend the program. And thus, we don't have any unobserved bias in the 2 groups. So in spring 2013, students were invited to apply. All the students who were invited to apply, they were randomized into 2 groups. Some of them received the summer learning program, right? There's our kids that we call the treatment group. And others did sort of business as usual during the summer. They didn't get in, we call them the control group. And then sort of at the end of the day, we're able to compare the outcomes of those 2 groups and to say with confidence that it is because of the summer learning program that we see those differences. And it's that randomization that makes that possible. Now, the study also, because this study is really aimed in terms, I talked about the proof of concept, and it's developed that way because the goal of this is to provide advice to policymakers across the nation. And so as a result, not only do we use the randomized controlled trial, which provides sort of this very rigorous set of evidence, but we also do things like we have very high standards for statistical significance, including using statistical procedures to avoid finding false positive results due to the number of hypotheses that we test. So highly rigorous in terms of the outcome study. Now this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of what kids are in the study. And so you'll see that the vast majority of them are low-income students, and they're non-white. And so the reason why you see the NA for eligible for free and reduced lunch in Boston is because in Boston there's a universal free and reduced price lunch, and those data aren't necessarily tracked. And you'll see that about 42% of our sample are scored at the lowest level in ELA or mathematics, and that's a little bit lower at a quarter in Boston. All right, So I talked a little bit about the value of this study, but really this value, one of the other unique things is that this extends over time, right? So I'm going to talk about results that come out of fall 2013 after the kids went through this first summer, but they went through another summer of programming in summer 2014. We're collecting fall outcomes then too. We're also looking at school year outcomes, and so we're going to have a series of findings that are going to emerge over time. And by 2016, after all the outcomes are analyzed, district leaders and funders are going to have a lot more information about whether voluntary summer learning programs can attract and retain large numbers of students, whether those programs have near and long-term impacts on summer learning outcomes, the operational features that are needed to make those programs effective, and then we'll also have data about the cost effectiveness of this. All right. I talked a little bit about the rich set of implementation data that we have, and I'm going to reuse these data and we link it to our outcome data in the study. And so as part of the study, RAND observed every classroom of students in each of the districts for an entire day. And so that yielded about 800 observations over the course of each summer. We also surveyed classroom teachers who taught the students, and we interviewed site leaders, teachers, and coaches. All right. So the near-term results that I'm going to talk about today are based on how students did soon after the programs ended. So the measures that we use are, we administered a generalized mathematics and reading knowledge assessment in the fall of 2013, between like the third and fifth week of school. And we used it's a Pearson product called the GRADE for the reading assessment, and the GMADE is the math assessment. We also administered the DESA, which is asked teachers to fill out a survey on each student. So each student in the control group or the treatment group, their teacher of record received a survey, and they filled it out. Then these questions asked them to rate social and emotional competencies of their students. And the reason why we surveyed teachers is because at this age, kids are not necessarily reliable survey takers, particularly on questions where we ask them Likert scale. We want them to rate on a scale. So we are asking their teachers to rate them on their social and emotional competencies. And a lot of those have to do with self-regulation, self-perception, and the like. And then our analyses compare scores of students who are admitted into the program, our treatment group, to those students who are not, who are our control group. And we were able to say that those differences are due to the summer program opportunities. All right, so what did we find? One of the most interesting things that we found is that these programs offered students summer opportunities they otherwise would not have had. Okay, so when we administered the GRADE and the GMADE, we gave kids a really short 4-question survey that asked them what they did over the summer and whether they participated in any activities. 58% of the study control students reported not attending any type of summer program in 2013. And that's across all of the districts. And these were all students who, they and their parents, had signed them up to take part in these programs. Now this number is substantially lower, that percentage is substantially lower in Boston. You'll see it's 37% in Boston. And that's due in part to the fact that Boston offered a recreational scholarship to all students who were in the control group. So they were given a voucher to attend another program for a couple of weeks. And about 24% of those students who were offered scholarships did use it in the summer of 2013. Okay, so these programs, they have demand and they're continuing to fill a need. All right. Ron alluded to the attendance rates in Boston, and this slide will help go into that. Okay. So in terms of attendance in these programs, we look at a few things. One you'll see on that second column is the no-show rate. Now these are all students who applied to the program, got in, but didn't show up on day one. They didn't show up for one day of the program. And you'll see that that percentage really varies across district. And it's relatively low in Boston, particularly when you compare it to like a high of almost a third of the kids in Duval. So almost for any program that you have during the summer, there are going to be kids who sign up, but circumstances are going to change despite even when people have really good efforts in communication, and they won't show up. Then we start looking at sort of the average daily attendance rate. For kids who attended at least one day, how frequently did they attend? Now in Boston, you'll see that's 80%. So a typical kid in Boston Summer Learning Program attended 80% of the days, which is relatively high. We also looked at sort of like who's really attached, who's a really high attender. These are kids who attended 85% or more of the days. You'll see that number is 60%, that percentage is 60% in Boston. And then we also want to look at like who comes, tries the program, is like, I'm out, right? Like I'm not coming back, I'm done. Because that's another good indicator of sort of attachment and the quality of programming. And you'll see that that percentage is relatively low in Boston at 4%. In comparison to Dallas, which had the highest percentage of that. And in Dallas, it's interesting because when we interviewed teachers, they tended to say that there was a lot of confusion about what the program was about. So they sold it kind of as this camp-like experience, but the program itself is very similar to the mandatory school program with enrichment activities. And so there was a lot of confusion about sort of the intent of that, which could be related to those high percentages of kids who sort of tried it out and didn't want to come back. All right, so Ron kind of went through the results a little bit, but I'll reiterate them again. So what we found is in fall 2013, treatment students came back in the fall, having performed significantly better than control students in mathematics. Every district contributed to this overall effect. And we consider the difference between the control group and the treatment group to be a meaningful advantage that they had at the beginning of the fall. And then what's going to be interesting is that our analyses that we're conducting now, we're going to be able to say whether that effect persists throughout the school year as well. All right. He also alluded to the fact that we did not find significant differences between treatment group and control group students in the reading test, which was surprising to some people, particularly since the summer loss literature indicates that for high poverty students that summer learning loss is greater than their higher income peers. We have a few hypotheses about why we don't find any effects in reading at this point. The first has to do with the skills that kids are trying to learn. So these are students who are in 3rd grade going into 4th grade. The programs are focusing primarily on reading comprehension is what kids are doing. They're not learning to read, they're not learning to decode. They're actually learning to comprehend text and to apply their knowledge of it. And that's a really difficult skill to improve and measure. There's a lot of literature around this, and I know that when we went out to each of the districts, they also talked about their own school year struggles in this area as well, that they see that during the school year, even with a much longer period of time, it's difficult to move these reading comprehension measures. It could also be that control group students didn't lose ground in reading, right? Maybe they were all reading at home. We do know that kids read at similar rates at home between our treatment and control group. And so we don't actually have a measure of loss in this study, so we don't know if kids are losing ground or not. So that's another hypothesis. And the other one could be that overall instructional quality was not sufficient. All right. Now, across all of the districts, we also saw that treatment students did not perform better than their control group counterparts on the DESA, our measure of social and emotional competence. But as Ron alluded to, Boston's estimate is higher than any other district's estimate. The other districts are basically at 0. And Boston their estimate is basically in line with what we're seeing in mathematics in terms of the magnitude of it. It does fall shy of statistical significance on its own. The study's not powered to find effects at the district level. So it's going to be interesting. So we know that Boston is the only district to be intentional in this area. So we think that there may actually be something there. We have a theoretical basis to think that that estimate may actually mean something, that it's not just noise. And then we'll know more because we had that second summer of programming, and we'll be able to look again at the differences between the treatment group and the control group from fall 2014 to be able to see if this persists, and we'll be able to say a lot more about this over time. Now the first one was for that mathematics. Attendance and dosage were related to higher treatment effects. So sort of at 13 days, we see a boost for kids in mathematics, and it's even greater at 22 days. So those sort of have the biggest treatment effects. And same thing with the hours of instruction. We see steady increases with kids. Once they hit like 26 hours of instruction, they have even the greatest effects. All right. So for mathematics, these ideas of like attendance and dosage, getting opportunities for practice seem to be what mattered the most. And the mathematics outcomes were sort of, kids did well on it, irrespective of our measures of instructional quality. However, for reading, what we found were that aspects of quality were positively correlated with our reading outcomes. So for reading, unlike math, the dosage and the attendance, you see slow upticks, but sort of nothing big there. That wasn't sort of what was driving the outcomes. However, aspects of quality were related to those outcomes. So first of all, students who had teachers who had just taught the 3rd or 4th grade, so this is a grade level match for the kids. Those are teachers who know those content standards better than others. Students who received higher quality language arts instruction, and that's based on Rand's observational ratings of that classroom's. And then also students that were in orderly summer sites where the kids had relatively low incidences of misbehavior, where programs had clear procedures and consistent procedures and effective procedures for dealing with student behavior. All right. So altogether, the findings suggest that providers may want to plan programs that run 5 to 6 weeks. If they're interested in academic outcomes, schedule 60 to 90 minutes of math per day. Try to hire the best, most effective qualified teachers with grade level experience as part of that. And to create positive climates that promote student behavior. And funders may want to look for programs with those characteristics as well. And I would say that even for programs that don't desire to have an academic component to it, I would urge them to be intentional about how they're using their time and how they're thinking about developing the skills that they want developed in those programs. And then it also adds some findings from our prior years that suggest that strong implementation depend on this idea of early and comprehensive planning, developing an engaging curriculum that's matched to student abilities and needs, strong hiring practices of teachers, and that includes early hiring of teachers, which I know can be difficult at times. Program structures that maximize time on task for both academics and enrichment. So really ensuring that you have a program that sets all of your instructors up to be really intentional about the time that they have with kids. The time that we have with them in the summer is so short. We're talking about 5-week programs. And even at a full day, it's just not a lot of time. You want to make sure that you're able to sort of maximize that time so that students are learning what you really want them to learn and having the experiences that you really want them to have. And then, of course, strategies for maximizing attendance. And those things can include positive climate, caring teachers, making sure that kids develop a friend in the program, and then also small incentives in some cases, like ice cream parties and things like that. Chris, how am I doing on time?
You're fine.
Yeah, all right. All right, and so this is how everything is going to unfold over time. So what we started in 2013 with actually a report based on those formative feedback results called Getting to Work on Summer Learning that provides advice for program providers. You have in front of you Getting Ready for Fall, which shows the impact of one summer on the fall tests. We're currently producing a report that describes the impact of one summer on the school year. So as of spring 2014, based on one summer of participation, how are students faring? And then in 2016, we're going to get into the really interesting work, which is thinking about the impact of 2 years of summers on student outcomes. And then we'll have another report that will come out describing how to implement high quality summer programs. And the way we're conceptualizing that at this point is to use a lot of our observation data to be able to really describe what student days are like, and then be able to point to the programmatic decisions that people make that help influence those days, and whether kids are having really good, engaging days, or whether actually it's really a terrible day for a kid.
I think each of us probably knows somebody in life whose actions speak louder than his or her words. We all know somebody like that. Superintendent McDonough has been a steadfast supporter of this new model of summer learning First is CFO for the Boston Public Schools, and now is Superintendent. Please join me in welcoming Superintendent John McDonough.
Good morning. I start off with thanks. You are the people who are engaged in supporting the kids in Boston. We know a few things implicitly. Extra time counts, but it only counts if it's used well. So I know that I got here a little bit late. I'm sure that Chris welcomed and organized you. I am sure that Ron inspired you. I know that Jennifer grounded you. So I bring you greetings from what I only found out last week was the accidental superintendent in Boston. That's what the Globe referred to me as. I also appreciate Jennifer's incorporating the word noise in her looking at data. There's a lot of noise that surrounds more than just data. But what I appreciate about this event at this point in time is that it's focused on the work. Thank you. Thank you for focusing on what matters. Summer learning in Boston has now been with us for quite a while. We stepped into the water. I remember Jeff Riley speaking about before he moved up north. He used to cherish the fact that he would play in the space that nobody else plays. And that's really out of school time. And whether it be having the great opportunity to look at fundamentally redefining the calendar, the time in the school day for Boston Public Schools, or looking at the use of vacation periods and acceleration academies, or looking at the opportunities that we have during the summer. All of it is part of a much broader effort for us to figure out in a thoughtful and intentional and rigorous way how we do become very purposeful about eliminating both opportunity and achievement gaps. The value of the summer learning project is really in its focus on what works. And its focus on, if we only knew a little bit more, we would know more about what worked really well. None of us can do this work alone. I think all of us, I know that all of us are committed to it. But the two major issues we face in this field and in many other areas that are important to the well-being of students is when we identify what does work and what does work well. How do we scale it and how do we sustain it? There is never an easy answer to either one of those questions. But the power is in the definition, the evaluation, the validation, which then becomes attached to something that, if it is not, is very close to a moral purpose. it becomes the right thing to do. I am truly grateful to all of you who recognize that this city needs each one of us to be involved in the lives of students in the city. You all continue to play a very important role. If we do it well, our students will thrive. This is about doing it well. So on behalf of all of us within the Boston Public Schools, I do want to point out and recognize the extraordinary work that our Expanded Learning Time team within BPS has also done over the past several years working with you. On behalf of all of us, on behalf of the 57,000 students within the city of Boston, and from the accidental superintendent, thank you very much.
Agenda off, we have our esteemed panel. All of them have been involved with summer learning in other contexts, and all have been partners in the Boston Summer Learning Project. You'll see their biographies in your folder, but allow me just to do a brief introduction. You've met Jennifer. Melissa Partridge, who now is the Director of Transformation Strategy and Compliance at the Office of, at the Boston Public Schools, has been with this project since 2011, and she's been a key partner, as Ron alluded to, on the assessments, but on a whole bunch of other fronts, curriculum, teacher hiring, in getting this whole thing off the ground way back when. Kristen McSwain is Executive Director of the Boston Opportunity Agenda, which is Boston's Cradle to Career agenda. It's a collective impact agenda, and she's been a key player in this from the beginning as well. And finally, Eric Arnold, Executive Director of Hale Reservation, great outdoor learning environment, and he's been a partner in this approach since 2011. So all of them have been here since before the study, actually, and have continued through it. So I just want to throw a question out there and get everyone rolling. Eric, we'll start with you on the end. What do you take from this study?
It's pretty. Am I supposed to use this?
Yeah, you can use that.
Is this working? How's that?
There you are.
Great. Thanks, Chris. It's great to be here and to see everybody. It's a fun day to be really looking at these results. And I've heard Jen speak about this a few times. Every time I do, I gain a little bit more from that experience. But I think there's a variety of exciting components that influence all of our work in the city that come from this study to date. I think one thing that stands out to me is that we are proving that we can really move the needle, and it is great to have a third-party evaluator helping us identify that. Those of us who have been sort of doing this work for a long time, we believe our impact is there. We feel strongly that we're making a huge difference in the lives of children, but now to have this data behind it is really important. So how we use that is also a really key thing. And I think that this study and the work that we've been doing has also really allowed us to become a community of learners. The network of organizations that have been working with RAND, with NIOS, and looking at this data and thinking about how do we improve programs from there. It's given us an opportunity to work together, to look for best practices, to look at things that are going to influence the way we provide programs to students and how we can do that. And to be open-minded about feedback is really important. And to have that happen with a partner that, I don't know how many years back I looked, but I wasn't aware that BPS was as open to being a partner as they are, and they are so open to us working with them to help fulfill the needs. It really is taking on the mindset, and we've heard it said many times, you know, it takes a village to raise a child. The village is bigger than just BPS, and they're willing to look outside and say there are community-based organizations that are strong, that have good resources, have ways to implement education programs that can really enrich a child's life. And I think that's really important to have that partnership that is key to making this whole thing work out. And I think another piece that to me that stands out about this, and Jen highlighted this a little while ago when she was talking about the results, and in particular, even when Arthur asked his question about the social emotional growth, being intentional about what we do is how we move the needle, and that's really, really important. And how we take results of information and data back to be intentional with that information and use that in our training, even as early as in our hiring, in our training, in our orientation with students, and how we design programs, and looking at every minute of every day and how important that is for students. And because we don't have a lot of time in the summer, it's a short window. And for us to move the needle, we need to take every minute and use that very key design of programs that we're using that time really, really well. I think those are sort of the overall takeaways that I have at this point from that. I think that this has been a great opportunity for us as a community-based organization to get some valuable feedback, be part of a great partnership, and work to really help move the needle on some exciting things that we can influence.
Thanks. Kristen, I'll pose the same question to you. What do you make of this initial round of findings?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of things that jump out to me from having heard the presentation a number of times too. And each time I sort of pick up something new and think about it a little differently. So stick with me, and in 6 weeks this might be a different answer. But I think that one of the things that Eric said is really true is around the intentionality. And using data and evaluation as part of continuous improvement for programming. I think that is one of the things that's very clear, because over time, as we did year over year, the first 2 years of the study were sort of practice. We got feedback from Rand and made some changes, and I think saw some results because of that and because of that intentionality. So that is key to me. I think the second thing that's really key, though, is to remember that it is only 5 weeks, which sounds like a really long time until you translate it to that is 25 days. And in the life of a young person, that's not very long. And so really managing our expectations about what's realistic to be able to do in 5 weeks. So in some ways, the fact that someone came in and didn't see huge changes in their reading, when you sit back and reflect on it, in 25 days, maybe that's not so astounding, right? I appreciate the research, but maybe that's not so astounding, right? But what we can do is look at what the underlying factors are that contribute to making things improve. So the pieces around the kinds of teacher, the pieces around the type of time. I think there's a whole lot of potential in there, but I also think there's a lot of potential in sort of saying maybe summer reading is actually just a time to have a love of reading that then connects to the school year. And so the piece for me that we need to really think about is not only what can we do in summer and managing the expectations around that, and I think we don't know enough to even do what I just said, so don't go and do that, but let's stay tuned, is to really think about how it connects to the school year. And that for me is part of this whole year learning cycle for young people that we've been talking about, that I think these findings really move forward. And then the third thing for me that they really highlight is the need for all of us to be doing this together, because we each have different program design models, and I think most of us want to continue to do that. But how do you do that and also be working together to focus on the kinds of outcomes we want to see for kids in 25 days, and how those connect to the school year? So those are sort of the three highlights that from my perspective, when I think about the outcomes that we've seen so far, are the things I want to continue to be focused on.
And Melissa, share your perspective from the district perspective. What do you make of these initial findings? Another mic here.
We're sharing, we're collaborating. This experience has been such a tremendous learning for the district on so many different levels. Being a part of the RAND study and working with Jen and her team, the first 2 years we got formative feedback, and it was the best coaching and advice. We have a lot of consultants running through VPS, and I have to say RAND is probably the best we've ever had. although you were an accidental consultant, I guess. But just to, you know, echo what John McDonough said is, you know, we've been working so hard to make expanded learning truly real, and not by older definitions of adding time to the school day or doing this. This is truly trying to build a continuous system of learning. So taking every available minute for a child and make it engaging and something that they can learn and grow from. And these early findings give us some evidence that we're onto something, and all of our efforts are actually working out, which is tremendous. From the academic data, I mean, that is a story that will continue to unfold, and I think we've had to learn patience in this. It's not going to be a silver bullet. We're not going to find something out right away. To echo what Kristen said, you know, it's 25 days. So I think what we're trying to focus on, and the academic data will continue to guide us, is what is realistic in 25 days that can make impact for students. And that is something we're trying to crack the code on from the academic side of the house. I think more interesting to us right now at this moment, because we're trying to be patient, is the formative feedback we got early in the study, but now the correlational findings are really interesting to us, and we can start to fold that into program development and program planning. The daily attendance rate for us, I think, was a smashing success. It felt like it was 100% to us. And I think that flags that this program, or we want summer programming to be so engaging and so interesting to students that they will come. I always say, you know, definition of insanity. In summer, we would give kids the same thing they got in the school year. So let's bring kids back to the same old hot classrooms and give them more of the same and expect them to be super excited and show up every day. Not happening. So it's because of every partner in this room that students show up, because they're getting something so different that they don't get in their normal lives. And that's very exciting. So how do we build that into the school year? So that's a finding. Out of the correlational, you know, of course, it's, you know, intuitive. Quality instruction matters. How you organize the day matters. Social emotional, I mean, in Boston we should be so proud. We've actually made that an equal part to the academics. We've made enrichment, although I hate the word enrichment, I think it's more experience. We've made that just as important. So we kind of have these three pillars of summer programming of what matters. And how do we carry that into the school year? So I think as the findings unfold, and again, I say we have to have patience, because the story will continue to tell us things. It may tell us things we don't want to see, that we're not having an impact in ELA, or this is not happening. So what does that mean? And then we're going to have to make action from that. So I think the last thing I'll say is, you know, we are having sources of data and information that we didn't have before. Now it's up to us in the district to use it to make really good, informed decisions, and that's really where we're at.
Great, thank you. So it's interesting, each of you mentioned, you know, we have these great results, and each of you mentioned some element of the process that was helpful. Eric talked about BPS as being open to partnerships and new kinds of partnerships. Kristen talked about the value in working together, sharing data. Melissa talked about informing a year-round expanded learning strategy, you know, not just a 5-week program. I want to ask Jen, what do you make of this process, and can we get any better?
So I have to say that of all the districts, we've been working with these 5 districts for going on 5 years now, and I have to say that Boston stands out as the district that's made sort of the largest year-on-year improvements. In terms of its programming and the quality, and has done the most to think systematically about summer as part of the school year experience, as part of what communities can bring to the table, and thinking about how to create experiences for students, and then how to use data to feed back into that system. And that is, actually, that probably is one of the most remarkable things for me in terms of sort of Boston and what's unique about this city.
Eric, I want to dig in a little deeper. You talked about BPS as a partner. And how has been, you've always run great enrichment programs at Hale, everyone knows that, people pay money to do them. How has this sort of collaboration enhanced what you've been doing?
That's a good question. I think, when I think back to whatever it was 4 or 5 years ago when we began this process, and we were looking at the collaborative part with BPS and talking about integrating academics, which we believe academics are happening while we're doing it, and we had always had the philosophy that we were doing it in sort of this osmosis sort of way, they were getting it. And I think coming back, early feedback for us was, you're not intentional enough about your academics, and therefore you're not going to quite hit the marks that you want to. That osmosis method isn't going to quite work as well as you might think. And I think, so for us, the ability to have the partnership and the feedback and to be able to then link a lot more of what we're doing much more specifically with curriculum components that BPS has been able to put forth goals, specific goals, and have some very standardized components that we're able to focus on have really helped, and they really help us with that sort of key partnership side of things. And overall, that helps us as an organization, grows our capacity and our ability to sort of to do the same type of work beyond just this small summer program that we've been a part of, but how do we integrate that in other components of what we're doing at Hale? I don't know if I hit your question.
Yeah. Well, let me ask Melissa to represent the other side of the coin. What is it like as the district to partner with Hale and so many other organizations? What's the advantage for the district?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's wonderful. I think I always talk to people as we go to, a part of the study with the other districts is we convene together and we talk, and the envy of other districts of how many partners we have in this wealth of resource and CBOs we have. It's not lost on us. We get reminded every time we go to one of these convenings. I won't lie, in the beginning it was messy. I think that CBOs had some, much understood frustration of how do you break through this bureaucracy and system and actually gain meaningful relationships, and what are the principals that actually call you back because I want to go, campaign them to work with my CBO, and how does this all work? And I think we had to, as a district, we can't just expect good things to come out of CBOs and for you to partner with us and do all the work. We had to create a really structured access point for you to engage with us and us to be good partners in return. So I think through this summer learning project, we've learned how we need to be good partners. I'll say a great offshoot of that is, in the district, we were running our own proprietary summer programming, a very large offering. And it was run in BPS schools, by BPS teachers, by BPS administrators, and it was not impressive whatsoever. And Summer Learning Project taught us how to be impressive by incorporating really good partners, and so we made a shift to take on a major partner to take over our largest summer programming, which was Bell. So working with partners has had such a footprint and such an impact on us to the point that we've completely redesigned summer to be majority partnership with CBOs. So I think that's been a tremendous experience for us.
I just want to piggyback on one of the things that you were just saying there too. I think that from our vantage point, watching the district as well become more and more tuned in with the importance of social emotional. It's clearly something that teachers know, districts know that that's important, but I think having had the opportunity for so many teachers to go to locations around the city and watch a program really focus on social emotional. It was highlighted earlier, but we're this far away from statistically showing that we're moving the needle on social emotional growth, which across with other cities, that wasn't the case. So we know when we do that, we can make a difference in how kids feel about themselves, the experience that they have, how they feel about learning, how they interact with their peers, how they make friends and all that. And I think working with the district and the district acknowledging that component as being so important for youth development has been a great process as well. So sort of, I don't know that, it's what as Melissa talks about what they're learning, I think that's something that I've watched that evolve as time is going on.
Teachers feel really strong about the experiences that both their kids had, but they had, and the new kinds of professional relationships that they developed and the tools that they developed. So that was really encouraging. So I'm hearing from Melissa and Eric this set of two-way expectations, collaboration, accountability. Is this collective impact, Kristen?
So I think if you put about 20 more people up here, yes. I think that's one of the things that I would say has been the most important part of this process. The outcomes that they both just talked about don't happen when you have one partner partnering with one school or with the district. They happen when a lot of different people are at the table, bringing their best thinking, their best resources, and some of their challenges that need to be solved, and need to be solved across the district, across program. And that really is the piece of collective impact that we've seen happen, as well as the focus on data. But I think, harking back to Ron Dorsey's comments this morning, I know that vertical alignment of assessments is not terribly sexy, but that's an important piece of the work. It's an important piece of understanding what's happening with young people, and that never would have happened if one program went to the district and said, hey, would you do this? It's too time intensive, it's too costly, there's not enough feedback from different participants, whether it's the district side or the community side, to really have an understanding of why that would be important, what we need to learn. And when we made a few misses, which we inevitably did, there was a lot of misses the first couple of years. Being able to sit down and talk through what we learned, what worked, what didn't work, how we could make it better. All of that is a piece of the collective impact. And I think more importantly, when we talk about individual programs, I have 3 young people. Those programs are only as good as my ability to get my young person in them, right? Which is the same for every other kid. But if we take a step back and look at the system of providers, at the system of schools, and think about it at that level, the changes are more likely to have an impact in all students, because all students will have access, than whether or not my kid or your kid happens to be lucky enough to get into the summer program at Hale. And so I think that is also the piece of collective impact, which is it's not about individual programs. It's really about building a system of summer programming and other things that work, which is why, and we haven't really talked about it much this morning, why having additional partners join in the evaluation pieces, to me, has been really important, because we obviously don't have enough money to fund every single summer program. You all have different streams of funding, but if we want to be able to talk about what we're doing together, we need to be using the same language. We need to be thinking about the outcomes we're looking for young people in the same ways, and using our data conversations to move things forward. And you can't do that if you're using one assessment and they're using something different, and this group isn't even thinking about social and emotional because they haven't gotten to it yet. So that is also the piece of this work, and the collective impact piece of this work that I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. And Melissa, play off that. I saw you nodding. So more programs speaking the same language, is the BPS open for more business in this sense, and how so?
Absolutely, and I think, I don't know, is John Sproul? John Sproul's not here. Anyway, he's Director of Partnerships and Development for the district, and he's done a lot of deep work on alignment. So what is the mission of your organization out there? What are the outcomes that you're trying to produce, and how does that align with what the district is trying to do? I think the district, and I'll take ownership for it, we haven't told you all the time what exactly we need and what we're looking for and where we really need the help. And I think that's something we're getting better at. So how do we align with you to find the best fit and let you know what types of outcomes we're looking for? And then how do we agree on what the instruments are, or the tools of how we're going to know, are we moving the needle and are we getting there? And I think that John's done a lot of deep work with Chris, and NIOST, to try to get there and figure this out. That way we're all speaking the same language. We all know what we're looking for. We're all goal setting together. And it's not this, let's shoot arrows out into the wilderness and see if we hit something. It just doesn't make sense. So I really appreciate all the work and patience people have had to get that going. And it's a continual improvement, and we're always open for business. And we're always open for feedback as well.
And we're not giving you the alphabet soup of tools and measures we use, but I do want to ask Jen, are we looking at the right things? We're about to get into some sessions that are very specific to program quality and to looking at how you develop these, what I'd say, power skills, these skills that are transferable and portable over life, where we have a good fortune. We have 2 great research and coaching partners in our backyard, NIOST, which is at Wellesley College, and PAIR, which is all over the place. They've been our partners in shaping this work. But tell us from your vantage point, Jen, you see not just Boston programs, but programs around the country. Are we looking at the right things?
Well, there are lots of things that you could look at, right? And I think that the answer is yes, because you're looking at things that relate to the experiences that you're developing for kids, so that you're aligning your programming with your outcomes. So a lot of times that doesn't happen. So I talked about sort of the other districts in social and emotional learning, for instance. And so when we went and we interviewed district leaders in all the districts, they would say, our programs are going to influence social and emotional outcomes. We want kids to be developing those skills. They didn't do anything. There's nothing, and so people question me, well, how did they think that was going to happen? And my answer is kind of glib, but kind of like magic. That just by putting kids around adults that might or might not be nice to them, that good things will happen without doing anything intentional to develop those skills. And so in anything that you do, and there are sort of a host of different types of programs in Boston. And so the ones that we're studying sort of combine these academics and the enrichment, and I know that some other ones you're just focused on enrichment and social emotional learning. And so I think that the biggest lesson is thinking about what do I want to measure, right? So what's important to me? And then going back and thinking, okay, so what am I doing inside my program that's going to lead to those outcomes very intentionally, because they don't happen by magic. They happen through sort of back mapping sort of experiences, training teachers, providing curriculum, and providing certain experiences to kids, or else it won't happen.
Thanks. Yeah, they're not magical, and they're not
No.
invisible either. They're observable.
Yes.
And when I was much younger and 30 pounds lighter, I played basketball, and my father would give me constructive criticism after every game. And of course, it's hard you only hear the criticism, not the constructive. Eric, you've been a part of this for a long time, and we've alluded to some issues. I mean, what's it feel like to be part of a community where everything's measured and shared?
What's it feel like? I'm going to just leave that alone for a second. It's like opening your closet, I guess. You know, I don't know. All the dark shadows and all the things that are in there that you are, you think you've got sort of under control, get brought out on the table, and that's a good thing, because you then really begin to identify little things. I mean, having someone evaluate in depth your arrival time it's good, because arrival time is really important. And then when you realize you don't do it real well for a little while, or something along those lines, the list of all the things that are being looked at really, exposes your areas of weakness. But I think that's the only way to get better, and we have to be open-minded to it. We have to be willing to accept the feedback. And then what I think is great is to sit with the other. The small list of organizations you saw earlier on one of the slides that Jim put out, to sit with them and all talk about where our weaknesses are and share what is it the YMCA does that's really well in an area that we're not doing as well, and let's share those best practices. That allows us to get better. And I think doing that in environments where it's a safe group to really talk about that stuff is how you get better at what you're doing. And those are important. That's an important process. And I think keeping it somewhat controlled, and information doesn't just go everywhere about every individual group, has been important. But it gives us then that opportunity to say, okay, how do we look at this and improve on those areas and know the spots where we're weak.
Mm-hmm. The inventory of our collective closet is called the PRISM, and it's in your folder. You see exactly what's actually measured. Eric alluded to some of the things, but they're in your folder here. All right, so I want to pick up an issue. Kristen said something that really surprised me to think about, but it's true. 5 weeks is only 25 days. Here we are in February planning those 25 days. I know Eric plans every hour in those 25 days. But everyone to a person has said, what would it look like if we applied lessons from summer to the school year? And I know the Wallace Foundation and RAND have raised those questions too. So I'd like everyone on the panel to talk about what that looks like when you apply what we know works in summer to the challenges of the school year. And Jen, can I start with you?
Sure. I think one of the biggest findings of the study are not listed in the report, and that is summer problems are school year problems. And so almost to a T, everything that we've identified across the 4 years in terms of program implementation, in terms of thinking about student attendance when there's struggles, in terms of student to teacher interactions, all of those things that manifest during the summer apply to the school year as well. And I think that I would encourage the school year to be as intentional as Eric is in planning his 25 days. Because I think often we're not as intentional during the school year as we could be. And I say that based on sort of my prior studies of school year and probably even my own kids' experiences in the school year and observing them. How can we sort of hone in on what's really important? And I think that, I mean, we may end up seeing changes in terms of how we're measuring accountability in schools eventually, which are going to provide some opportunities for transforming that space. And it may be an opportunity for the school year to look at some of what's been done in terms of the intentionality of summer and to be able to apply those lessons. But it's been really interesting. So the districts that I showed on the attendance slide that struggled with attendance, Rochester and Pittsburgh, guess who has attendance problems during the school year? Rochester and Pittsburgh. So what we see during the summer is often just a manifestation of what we see during the school year.
To echo some of what Jen just talked about is, I think, how do we most efficiently use our time? When we were going through the formative years with RAND, we got a lot of feedback. They essentially did, I guess, mini time audits, and we've done those in the school year with expanded learning time schools. And I think that's something that schools struggle with, is how do you make the most efficient use of time? How do you have time on task? So that's something we still struggle with, scheduling. So that's something we think about, and it was very much the same I think in the formative years, and continues to be to some perspective, scheduling summer. The big headline from the academic, and again, being patient, not taking it as a silver bullet, we have issues with English language arts. We just do. It's very complex. I think lots of districts struggle with that. How do you get children to read? How do you get them to comprehend and make connections to themselves in the world and what they're reading, and then make meaning of it and use of it? And we're having a really hard time with that. And summer is just one little window of time, so how do we use those 25 days? How do we use that time to inform what we're doing with students in the school year? So ELA is a struggle for us. I think the other thing that summer has told us is that enrichment and experience matters so much. And I really think that that was one of the causes for our great attendance and persistence of students. And I worked very hard to put that in the heads of lots of principals in the schools I go to, is that engagement and enrichment matters. I think sometimes we get so caught up in trying to get ready for MCAS or now PARCC that we forget that kids may not even want to come to school because of that, and it's so much focus and intensity on the academics. So how do we purposefully bring in this time? And it can be time that academics is, embedded within the experience or the enrichment, but we need to really plan that into the school day. And a huge part of that is having partners come in. I mean, if we're not doing it well and it's not appealing to students, let's bring partners in and have you help us with that. So those are some of the things for summer that we are trying to push all throughout the school year.
So there are so many different things that you could take from what we've learned in summer and apply to the school year. I think that the first is that partnerships are hard. And because they are hard, if it is going to work well, we actually need to put aside the time to plan for it. I mean, you're right, it's February and we're talking about July and it feels really late for 25 days. So if you think about that in the context of a school year, when is it that we're setting aside time to intentionally plan between schools and partners? I don't see it. Maybe you all do because you live it more than I do, but I don't see the intentional time that is set aside to be thinking about outcomes, to be thinking about curriculum, to be thinking about who's taking the lead on what, to acknowledging that there is someone who might be better taking the lead on some things than other folks, whether that is our school partners or our nonprofit partners, and who's going to lead. Like, I very rarely see those things happen for a school year, and they have to happen if we're actually going to utilize our partnerships to their fullest. And so I think that piece and that piece of learning from summer is the transitional work that needs to happen. And you see some of that work in what John Sproul is trying to do at BPS, but it is not as deep as it needs to be. It is not as broad as it needs to be. And we haven't yet landed on which partners work best for which schools. And I think that is a much longer piece of work that's going to take a lot of time. But as we do that work, really looking at what we've learned from summer is going to be critical, because that otherwise is wasted time, right? Because we've spent so much time thinking about design, thinking about feedback loops, and to not take that and transfer it is really would be a shame. So that's sort of my thought. I think the other thing is the piece that most resonates for me in the summer work. I think back to maybe our third summer when Rand came back and said, you need to use a curriculum. And we were like, what? We don't want to use a curriculum. This is summer. This is supposed to be fun. We're not going to use it. And we argued, and they argued back, and they won. Which actually was fine, because that was what we needed to do. And I think some of us in the nonprofit space are all like, well, those curriculums, those are boring, blah, 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 blah. We needed to actually step back and listen to what Rand was saying to us about what young people needed during that academic piece, because that was the expertise they were bringing to the table. And I think we need to actually sit back and listen to some of our schools about what they need to have happen and the best way that we can be used as nonprofit partners. And conversely, they need to really think about what we can bring to the table and where the leadership is that comes in through the nonprofit space. So I think there's a whole lot of work to be done, and I look forward to us trying to make it happen.
I think when you talk about the difference between, what we can take from this and influence the academic year, the thing that really stands out for me, and this is sort of ends up being a little bit of my soapbox, but it's the social emotional side of things, and that kids need to know how to navigate socially. And I think most of us sitting in this room know that our ability to work with other people is one of the most important skills we have to further ourselves and our success. And when we take a kid who's in 3rd or 4th grade and quickly in our minds make them 27 years old and succeeding and being successful contributors in our society, a lot of it has to do with their social emotional ability to be a part of a community and successfully part of a community. And I think that is something that we find is working in these summer programs. We're able to do that in these small networks where they're having some really unique and fun experiences that kids just grab a hold of, and they're allowed to explore some of their own the components of learning that really excite them. I think that's one of the best pieces we can take from the summer and try to help to continue to influence in the school year, and how do we make that happen.
Great. I want to turn back to the audience. Are there any questions percolating, any comments on the research, on the panelists' reaction to the research, any of your own reactions that you'd like to share? If you do, raise your hand really high so I can see it. I'm happy to call them out. We have a few more minutes left.
Just a quick question. I raise this often when I have the opportunity to do so. The state has the Mass Work-Based Learning Plan, which is a huge database that's been going on for a number of years, that has been consistent about summer programs, mainly job readiness programs, but it's well connected to employability, and I'm wondering, what are we considering in this smaller group to connect, how to connect to that database and make that part of our way of evaluating whether we're successful in the macro sense?
Now, let me just repeat that so everyone can hear. So Alan asked, the Massachusetts Work-Based Learning Plan, which is a set of work-ready competencies where supervisors are evaluating student employees at the beginning and the end of the summer program. There's now a big database with presumably tens of thousands of kids. What are we doing to look at that data and to collect it with the data we're looking at? Now, I'm not sure any of you is familiar with the work-based learning plan. Let me take a shot. We use different valid and reliable instruments, and we're somewhat agnostic about that. What we use, now I will get into alphabet soup, the SEO from NIOS. That looks at a similar set of skills as the work-based learning plan, and I would leave it to the researchers to see if there's an opportunity to collect data, to synthesize data that's been collected through different instruments. But at the end of the day, we're having a more deliberate focus on a few set of skills that subsume most of the rest. Self-management, critical thinking, collaboration, and perseverance. Recognizing that they get measured in slightly different ways with slightly different tools from slightly different perspectives. But I think that's an excellent idea. I keep saying that. And it's an area we should pursue.
Can I just say one thing on that, and it's related but different. You know, for our high school space and even our middle school space, we are thinking much more intentionally about how to use summer for experience, for work, but for also college credit. So I don't think we have been as intentional, but it's moving. And I think there's such an emphasis on high school redesign right now and thinking around our high school strategy, and summer is absolutely at the table. We've had great partnerships with the PIC. We've done a lot of work within English, and we have a new level 4 coming on board that is a high school. Summer is a huge component of that, and coaching and workplace and experience is just critical in this new model we're taking on for this school. So it's not lost on us. We're catching up, and we're just trying to do it well and be very intentional. We desperately need partners in our high schools that are going to help us figure this out, and using summer as that time. Summer is also so important to hold kids so they do not drop out, so that they come back. So I really thank you for that, but it's something we definitely need to pay more attention to.
Are you tracking individual child outcomes over time? So you go back to 2011. So do you know if individual kids are returning, A, and B, how they're doing? Do you have that kind of...
So the question is, are we tracking outcomes at the individual student level?
Yeah.
I can speak to that. Actually, Ariana, I have to give you a major shout out for this, because Ariana did the deep legwork of getting into our technology department and making sure that we have new systems in our student information to flag students of what program they're going to, so we can follow them over time. It's 2015. We were not doing this before. This really started last summer, was our kind of maiden voyage on this. And it was an undertaking to think, oh wow, wouldn't a school want to know if your student went to a summer program? And then how do we follow this? So this record or portfolio of participation will go with the student. So mad props to Ariana, because we have to do this. We totally revamped how teachers and principals were selecting programs for individual students, and now it's being flagged so we always know what the student has participated in, how many years, what the grades were that came out of the program, if it assigns grades. So this is what we're tracking. So we're working on it, but it was a maiden voyage for us.
We have a question down in front.
I think it's great that you guys are finally doing that. It's been some of our partners' frustration going to the same high school with 5 or 6 different outside programs that go into this high school, and if a high school principal doesn't have someone who coordinate all that, we're bumping into each other, but also serving sometimes the same students. So I think the other piece I have a question about is data sharing. Our programs, so there's a bunch of TRIO programs within Massachusetts, but also within the Boston area, and I think the TRIO folks are being very intentional about making sure that we're not going into the same high school when we do our grant over, that we're being selective of the high school that we want to work with. But also, I think, you know, the whole idea of a student might be in my program and then they transfer to a different program. As a program, we still need to track the students. I think even if at a district level, we're able to access and be able to advise our students better with their academic needs and outcome based on what their quarterly grades look like, and not wait until the end of the year. By then it'd be too late, especially for those programs that do have tutoring services available.
Okay, so the question is, how can data sharing among this array of nonprofit partners in the district enhance partnerships so that there is the sharing on both sides, if the partner knows how the young person's doing in school and vice versa. Right?
Sorry, it's me again. So we do not have a standardized way. We do not. And we need to have better information go to you, absolutely. I think personally what I found through Summer Learning Project is, how do I get IEPs to sites so they know, oh, by the way, the student has autism and probably shouldn't be running through salt marshes on Thompson Island because they don't like the feel of that and they're going to flip out. I know that's like a crazy example, but maybe we should direct that student to a different program that has indoor space. Things like that. We don't have a standardized way of sharing that kind of fine-grained information, and we need to, and it's a work in progress. I don't want to speak out of turn or make promises because Kamal Shabda will absolutely kill me, but I do believe that things are in the works, and we are trying to be better partners on sharing information with students. We do bump up against confidentiality, and I know that we're working around that, so non-disclosures are really important. We can't just open up our SIS to anyone, unfortunately, so it takes time to, how do we give you access to groups of students? I don't want to bore you with all of this, but we get it, and we are there with you. We are working on it. We just don't have standardized way right now, and I don't know, Chris, if you have some better information.
Yeah, I would say one interesting, data sharing has always come up as an obstacle, and we've tried to take it on directly and failed many times. Through this project, we've backed into what we should collect and why in collecting it securely. And so this is a step toward a solution. It's not the solution. But we've adopted a database called youthservices.net, which you'll hear about later. The fields reflect the work that's happening in summer learning over time. We're working with the district to make sure there's a connection there that's not manual but digital and through technology. That doesn't solve your very precise question, which is, I have consents, therefore I have access to the data. How do I get it? I think that's a workflow issue that has yet to be solved. But I think, adding to Melissa's comments, we're taking steps to get to that point. And on that point too, that we do have a model consent form. If you want to see what's being used in the project that's been referenced, that is the best way to ensure that you can access student data over time, is to get their parents' consent to do so. It's more secure than any other way. It takes a lot of legwork, I realize. We have time for one more question, then we're going to move to the sessions.
about instructional quality improvements throughout the year based on the summer.
I'll take that. So you raise a really interesting question. I think is an open research question at this point, and one that I think is like sort of on my next agenda of things that I'd like to study. So all of these programs have drawn teachers from the districts. And so in Boston, there are attempts to draw from feeder schools, so that there are some familiar faces to at least some of these students. But in reality, not every kid in a classroom will have had that teacher or will be going into the grade level of that teacher, even when they're sort of the most perfect match in terms of those types of things because of the feeder nature of the system. And so one real question I think that we have to think about is, are programs that are more linked to schools and are smaller in some kind of way, right, more effective? Are those schools able to capitalize on the learning made by kids during the summer in ways that other schools are not? And that is an open research question at this point. The only thing, the research that has been done in the past, sort of that has this teacher link, it's actually done in mandatory programs in Chicago, where the researchers there found that kids who continued with their same school year teacher actually had better outcomes than the kids who were assigned a different teacher. There's something about that consistency, teachers knowing the student, being able to hit the ground running from day one. But in the reality, a lot of these programs, teachers show up, and you might know a few kids, like if you're lucky, you know 5 kids in your class, and sometimes they might all be new. And for a lot of these programs, they have a very diverse range of kids in terms of ability levels in the classroom, and teachers have to figure that out during the first week or so, and at least they're 25 days. And so there is some kind of sort of like inefficiency there. And then there's also inefficiency on the drop-off back into the school year. So that teacher from the summer knows something about the kids now in their classroom. I know that Eric now is writing excellent paragraphs. Like, his writing skills have improved dramatically. But I don't necessarily have a way to feed that back to Eric's next year's teacher. And so this idea of feedback into the system is one that's really challenging. It's been challenging across all of the districts. And I think is an open question as to whether things could be more effective if we were able to tighten those things up.
And I just want to call it, thank you for the questions. Alan's question on high school competencies, how are we measuring them, how are we tracking them? The question on data sharing as a way to enhance partnerships, and the question on how we track teacher practice over time. This is exactly the kind of feedback we need for the Insight Center. And it's not just what we know, but it's also what we don't know and need to explore. And so that's great modeling. Unfortunately, those three have to be the only three questions. I have to play timekeeper. But let me close this panel by thanking you all very much for your comments.